1619, a big year. The English found those first years in America really hard. Remember, 4 out of 5 of the first 10,000 settlers died soon after they arrived in Virginia. Most people would have given up, but not the English. The harder the challenge, the more determined they became. If the colony was to survive, it had to grow. That meant sending women as well as men. The year 1619 was a turning point. After 1619, you could tell the English were in America to stay. It was a year of many firsts in Virginia. First boatload of Africans. First boatload of women. First labor strike. First time English settlers are allowed to own land. First elected lawmakers. That is a lot for any year. You already know about the boatload of Africans. Now, about those women. They too were sold on the docks. Do you want a wife? It will cost you 120 pounds of tobacco. Those are the terms when a shipload of women arrives in Jamestown in 1619. These are poor women who are unable to pay the cost of their Atlantic journey. They want a new life in this new land. The lonely men want wives. There will be instant romances on the docks. What do you think of these women? Do you think they are scared, courageous, crazy? A few white women have already been to Jamestown, but sending an entire boatload of them to be wives means that the English plan to stay and make homes in America. The French, who are settling in the north, are less likely to send women. Still, in 1619, the men in Jamestown outnumbered the women by 8 to 1. In 1619, the Virginia Company lets the settlers have land of their own. That gives them a reason to work hard. The first workers' strike in British America happens in 1619. Polish workers at Jamestown, who are glassmakers, demand the same rights as Englishmen. They get those rights and go back to work. There are Poles, Dutch, Germans, and Italians at Jamestown. Do you think it's strange that they all want English rights? What about their own rights? The answer to that is very simple. English men and women have more rights and freedom than people do in other European nations. They expect those same rights in America, and so do people from other nations who come to the English colonies. John Smith said no one would come to the New World to have less freedom. The charter of the Virginia Company said, all and every of the persons which shall dwell and inhabit within every or any of the said several colonies and plantations, and every of their children shall have and enjoy all liberties, as if they had been abiding and born within this our realm of England. That means that nobody will lose freedom if he moves from England to America. In 1619, a group of lawmakers known as Burgesses is elected to make laws. They form an assembly called the House of Burgesses. In England, laws are made by Parliament. The House of Burgesses gives the Virginians their own form of parliament. That has never happened in a colony before. In the 17th century, many European nations have colonies in America, as well as in other parts of the world. Those colonies are not all alike. In the Spanish colonies, no Europeans except Spaniards are allowed to settle. France admits only Catholics. The English colonies have open doors. Think about that for a minute. That decision, way back in the 1600s, to let all kinds of people settle in the English colonies made a big difference to our country. We would become a pluralistic society. What does that mean? Now that you know about colonies, let's get back to the House of Burgesses. In the 17th century, laws for colonies were made in the home country or by appointed governors and their councils. The House of Burgesses changed that. England was letting colonists make laws for themselves. That was a big first in history. An English governor did not have veto power over the Burgesses. What is a veto? Okay, you can do some work. Go to the dictionary and look that word up. The governor didn't use the veto very often. This is something you should remember. The House of Burgesses, formed in 1619, gave America its first representative government. It was the beginning of self-government in America. Whoops! Hold on, that isn't quite true. Some Indian tribes had representative government. The House of Burgesses was the first representative assembly in the European colonies. It was only a dozen years since those 3 small ships were tied to the trees at Jamestown, and the English colonists were doing something very unusual. They were making laws for themselves. Indians versus colonists. From the time of Columbus, the pattern was the same. The newcomers and the Indians would meet as friends and trade with each other. Then something would happen. Often, an Indian was killed or sold into slavery, and the Indians would strike back. Sometimes they showed remarkable patience. Sometimes they were just waiting for the right moment. For the Native Americans were much like the new Americans, good and bad, fierce and gentle. Warriors on both sides went too far. The massacres were horrible. At first, the Indian leaders tried to live in peace with the settlers, but some of them realized that it would not work, that it would be the end of Indian ways. The Europeans used up land. They cut the forests and filled the land with people. Indians were hunters. To keep their way of life, the woods had to be protected. Wild animals needed woods to live in, and hunters needed wild animals. Most Europeans understood that too. One Virginia governor said, "Either we must clear the Indians out of the country, or they must clear us out." The members of the House of Burgesses ordered 3 expeditions to drive out the Indians, in order that they have no chance to harvest their crops or rebuild their wigwams. There was another problem: arrogance, which means thinking you are better than others. In the 17th century, arrogance was often tied to religion. Many Christians believed that anyone who was not Christian must be inferior. The Aztecs believed those who weren't Aztecs were inferior. Before long, that arrogance would become racism. Some whites believed themselves better than all Indians. Some believed themselves better than all blacks. History shows that racists are troublemakers and often the worst of their own race. There were bigots and racists in early America, and they made trouble. Some of them wanted to kill all the Indians, and some Indians wanted to kill all whites. However, the real problem was the fight for control of land. Even when Indians and settlers were friendly, it usually didn't last long. The newcomers wanted Indian land, and naturally the Indians didn't want to give it up. Some fair-minded white leaders respected the Indians and wanted to share the land, but they were never able to control the land-hungry settlers.